All right, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. All right, everybody, welcome to Conversations on the Culture. And for some new folks that are here tonight, I just want to share with you that COTCUS.com looks to be a communication board, web chats that, yeah, we talk, but we also want to do. I've been a co-host of a program, It's a New Day, which Greg has been on several times since July of 2015. And I've had some amazing conversations with amazing people. But last spring, it started to hit me, you know, talk. The right talks and the left does. And I thought I'd like to do something where we can get people involved and start doing activism on the right. And we're still defining that, Greg and others. We're still trying to figure out what that looks like. I don't think it has to be super involved because people on the right generally are working people, and many of them are working more than one job. So we are conscious of that, and we'll talk about that. But we're looking to speak truth into the culture, and I believe that we have truth on our side. I don't mean to be arrogant about that, but we have people like Greg who have done their homework. They're not just making things up out of the blue. They have actually studied and have presented. They've earned the right to be heard, is like how I like to put it. So we love liberty, and we believe every American citizen should experience it to the fullest. We want to restore the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Individuals doing that, not the government. The government does not know what is best for each of us. That would be between what I believe is that's between God and each individual to find out why they were created and what they were created for. So we want to share these truths with friends, family, and neighbors. Invite them on and say, hey, you got to check out this webcast. Greg, if we get people who are here tonight talking to their friends, families, and neighbors about this, and they in turn talk to their friends, families, and neighbors, and et cetera, that's pretty powerful. We don't have to spend trillions of dollars doing that, do we?
No, not at all. There's power in communication and social media too, because when they hear something here, they need to communicate it to their friends and their neighbors. And whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, or anything, or just sitting down over the kitchen table or at lunch or breakfast or a cup of coffee with their friends, communicate what they've heard tonight.
Yes,
that's important.
Well, Greg, before we get started, would you share with the participants who you are and a little bit about your background, and please share how you came to write the book, Inconvenient Facts.
Yeah, I'm a geologist. I've got nearly 40 years of experience exploring various aspects of the Earth's history. I didn't set out to write a book. I set out actually to seek the truth, because as a geologist, I knew that some of what we're being told about climate change was just wrong. And it was this that drove me to find out the truth. We hear so much contradictory information back and forth. You just don't know what to believe. I mean, the climate skeptics sound believable, and you go, oh yeah, that's right. And then the people that are promoting catastrophic man-made warming, well, they sound right too, because of course there's a 97% consensus. So what do you believe? So I went back to the base data from NASA, from NOAA, peer-reviewed studies to find out what exactly it was and what the truth is. And what I found was frankly shocking. Most of what we're being told about climate change and global warming, degrees opposite visions of edge of climate apocalypse, is just wrong. And what I see is an Earth and humanity that are prospering, thriving, due to rising temperatures and increasing CO2. And that's really the big thing I want to get through to people today, any of your listeners, is that actually our climate change, and it is changing, is actually having tremendously beneficial effects to humanity and to the Earth's ecosystems.
We see what happens to the Earth when it's neglected. Greg, as you had commented in a previous conversation on WFYL, California is that terrible fire in, I forget the name of the town already, last fall.
Yeah, that was
Paradise.
Paradise. I talk a lot about fires when I'm heading off to, I travel around the country speaking about climate change to scientific groups, industry groups, and whatever. I'm talking to the professional engineers of Corsicana, Texas next week, west of Dallas. It'll be a 3-hour presentation I'm giving them, so it'll be a really deep dive into the subject matter. And what I do with this is I use fire as a great example of how the proponents of catastrophic man-made warming are just wrong, because it encapsulates so much. Because everybody thinks that forest fires are increasing, right? You did before you talked to me.
I did.
You
It's
did.
on the news constantly.
I did. I did. I mean, I thought forest fires were increasing. Obviously, it had to be, because that's what we're being told. And they just state just a fact. Forest fires are increasing because of climate change and global warming. And it sounds like it should be right, because warming temperatures should mean that the Earth's drying out and leading to more fires, right? But the actual facts are different by a long shot. And what we see is, and again, forest fire, this is just a great example. We look at fires globally, or at least the northern hemisphere. If we look there, it's really there's two things going on between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. We're going to need to get into that, but globally, forest fires have been in a long-term decline of 100 to 150 years. And the fire experts from the Canadian Fire Service and in the United States, the National Interagency Fire Center, both agree. Both of those scientists there and others from Sweden and Norway agree that declining fires are because of climate change. And it's because that, it sounds counterintuitive, but soil moisture is increasing, and that's dampening the number of fires throughout the world. And that's due to increasing soil moisture is due to two things: warming temperatures, and temperatures have been warming for the last, well, actually it started 300 years ago, but people like Al Gore will say it's been 100 or 150 years, but they've been warming for over 300 years. And warming temperatures mean that more water vapor can be incorporated in the atmosphere, which leads to higher precipitation. All right. The alarmists will tell you, well, that increasing precipitation means that it will lead to flooding. And in some cases that might be the case, but in most cases, what we see is it's increasing precipitation in arid, dry areas rather than necessarily leading just to flooding. And so what we see is that that's leading to increased soil moisture. That's turbocharged then by the fact that increasing CO2 fertilization effect means that plants need less water. The pores are smaller on there, and that's how actually plants lose most of their moisture, is through that transpiration process, breathing in and out. So they need less water, so they're sucking less water out of the soil, and that means that soil moisture will increase. And again, we see
thing,
that.
isn't it, Greg?
Excuse me?
That is a good thing.
That is a good thing. That's a hugely good thing. So that's leading to the increase in soil moisture. We even see the decrease in California. Nearly everybody thinks that clearly fires have to be increasing in California, right? They're not. According to CAL FIRE, who takes care of the data for fires for California, if you look at their data, and if you go to my website, which is inconvenientfacts.xyz, you'll see that I have a page there devoted to forest fires. And then on my blog, I've got one devoted to California fires. You'll see that actually fires over the last 30 years in California, the number of fires have decreased by almost 50%. Now, granted, in California, the area burned has increased a little bit, which means that the area, each fire is probably at least twice as big as what they used to be. and probably much more intense. And that's not anything related to um, climate change or global warming, but rather bad forest management techniques or that we've gotten away from. It used to be good forest management would include timbering, selective timbering, uh, controlled burns, actually, and then grazing within those areas. We've gotten away from all of those, and what it's led to is an increase in the growth of timber throughout the area. The Sierra Nevada Conservancy contends that there's 4 to 5 times too many trees per acre in the Sierra Nevadas, and that's leading then to a decrease, or excuse me, too many trees leads to again, each tree is sucking water out of the soil, so that'll lead to an increase in aridity because each tree is competing against the other tree for more soil moisture. What we see there is that also there's 3 things we need for forest fires and wildfires, and that's number 1, it's an ignition source, and there's 1,000% increase in people living in fire-prone areas in the West. Number 2, we need fuel. We've increased the number of fuel by 4 to 5 times as many as what it was due to our management practices. And number 3, you need an arid condition. With all those trees competing for the same soil moisture, we've increased that. So all three of those factors that we need for wildfires and forest fires, we've exacerbated by our own actions. And it's not due to global warming. It's not due to climate change, but rather it is due to human actions. And thank God that Ryan Zinke now is in charge of Interior.
Yes.
He is he's instituted last year some changes in forest management practices that will long-term help us out in this regard. But you can't turn an aircraft carrier on a dime, so it's going to take a number of years for us to institute and remedy these situations. But the big good news is, though, that forest fires have been in decline, and that's just a great example. And if you go to my website, inconvenientfacts.xyz, you can learn more about that. And what we see is that it's clear that what I'm telling you is backed up by science, facts, and data. If they're lying to you about that, what else are they lying to you about?
Well, what a great lead, Greg. Can I join the conversation? By the way, Greg, you can click on to make your to enlarge your picture.
How do I do that?
That I would have to ask Tyler.
You can share your screen now. If you just click share and then click desktop 1, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
And I'm also trying to bring myself back up so they can see me. Not sure how to.
Oh boy, I think I'm screwing up here, Tyler.
Yeah, I'm not sure here what just happened. Well.
We'll get her.
Okay, here we go. Here we go, guys. Hang on there. Okay, we got Greg. All right, that's fine. That's who we want to see. I did click start video, and that's what happened, Tyler. Well, hey, Greg. There's a really interesting op-ed in the Washington Times by Tammy Bruce. She's one of my favorite writers. And I really like what she did with this Green New Deal that 70 Democrats have signed on to. She calls it the Green New Hoax. I have a feeling you would probably agree with that title.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. It's a climate socialist manifesto masquerading as environmental policy, and that's no exaggeration. And if you've read that, you know what's in there. It's
Please, would you please share with us why this is worth the conversation and why it is draconian? Am I overstating the case in your opinion?
Not at all. I mean, what they want is what they want. Here, I'm screwing things up again, aren't I? Okay.
That was
Initially, what they're talking about is the main thrust is what they want to do is get us away from conventional fuels and into renewable energy sources. Those renewable energy sources would include wind, solar, geothermal, and tidal energy. Make note that there's nothing in there about nuclear. They don't like nukes. They want to get us completely away from all fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. So we're going to transition over into this grand new deal of renewables, which is impossible. But that's just, and let's just talk about that for a moment. What that necessarily means is that it's a regressive taxation system, and by that I mean it means it hurts the poorest among us the most, because the poorest among us use the highest percentage of their income for energy, and so we're actually abusing the poor. If you're a Christian, you believe in Christian or Judeo-Christian philosophy of helping those that are less fortunate than us, this will actually be counter to that. We have things, people like the Pope and others, and most of the mainstream Protestant religions are backing things like the Paris Climate Accord and carbon tax. But they're destining billions of people around the world to continued generational poverty. What they want to do is restrict reliable, inexpensive energy to very few people. If you look around the world, 2 billion people are in energy poverty. 1 billion people are without electricity. It's estimated that 4 million people die each year from lung-related diseases because they're cooking over open wood fires, usually dried dung wood, in their homes to cook their food and to heat their homes. And they could benefit, and those lives could be spared by providing them with reliable, inexpensive fossil fuels like compressed natural gas, propane, electricity, and things like that. So, but that's just the start of the Green New Deal. We go on with things like within this Green New Deal, they include a guaranteed job for everybody willing to work at a living wage.
That's kind of a contradiction, isn't it, Greg?
Oh, it is. It's crazy. And there's I'm in the middle of writing an article right now, a commentary on the World Bank, how it's been hijacked by the Greens. You know, it's supposed to help the poor, and it's actually hurting the poor. But also included in that, in this Green New Deal, is a ban on foreclosure of homes. There's a new federal bank that will be created to renegotiate existing home loans that they deem to be abusive. They want to cut military spending by 50% and close bases around the world. And they say, well, we don't have to fight wars for oil anymore. And that's their thinking about that we don't need a robust military. Crazy things like that. It
should be that simple, huh?
Yeah, right. I'm sure ISIS is going to agree to that. It's or Russia or China. It's a litany of just about every socialist idea that's come up over the last 30 years they've put into this bill.
And may I ask, Greg, does China have to adhere to these standards?
No. Actually, I was just looking today, India. Let's talk about India for a while. We hear a lot about China, but India has increased their funding. They just opened 40 new coal mines. They're opening more every month. They're increasing coal mining significantly in India. They're increasing their investment in coal-fired power plants significantly. And they just announced actually this week that they've provided electrification throughout all of India. They've been able to provide that because of coal-fired electricity generation services. That's a good thing for the people of India. They have their priorities straight, and Donald Trump has his priorities straight. Thank God he got us out of the Paris Climate Accord. Thank God that he did that. He had the courage to do nothing.
And we agree with that. We second that. Greg, Is there are we on the verge of running out of fossil fuels? Is there a crisis of that?
Oh my goodness, no. There's we're continuing to set records year after year on production of both oil and natural gas. We're both in Pennsylvania. I did some of the early work on the Marcellus. I was the co-author of the very first peer-reviewed comprehensive paper on the Marcellus shale. And the Marcellus shale is by far the largest natural gas accumulation in the world. And there's nothing that comes close to it. And Marcellus is just one of the resources we have here in the Northeast. We have natural gas resources that'll last, I mean, for sure, 100 years, 150, 200, who knows? Because
I have read that they have found resources under the Rocky Mountains that hasn't even been touched yet.
Yeah, the Permian Basin in Texas is the really big one. That's mostly oil. But as they're producing this, they're also producing natural gas along with it. And that's providing a lot of natural gas along with the oil. And they can almost give that away because they don't, they need to produce it in order to produce the oil. But it doesn't really mean a whole lot to them. So they're throwing all this extra natural gas into the system down in that area. Natural in Colorado, it's called the Denver Basin out there. It's huge with mostly oil again. We're the king here in Pennsylvania of natural gas. I've seen studies that my friend Bill Zagorski at Range Resources did where they looked at the gas in place. In other words, how much gas is actually in the rock. The Marcellus equals the next 14 largest natural gas field in the world combined, if you can believe that. That's how big it is.
So Greg, okay, so you're blowing a lot of preconceived ideas out of the water here. And you know that in southeastern Pennsylvania, we got, there are folks who are just, in my opinion, extremely misguided, fighting the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline. And I'm sure you're aware of that. We've had specialists on WFYL talking about, that it's the excavating of the fuel is clean. I mean, they've gone to great lengths to make sure that the process is pristine. Once again, I think of China, where you've got people walking around in Beijing with gas masks over there. We talk about the process, and if this is something that we should be worried about.
Well, no, I transitioned away from the natural gas. I was a geologist in the business for a long time. I debated, you might know the name Josh Fox. He did the pseudo documentary Gasland, where the flaming faucets were alleged to have been caused by drilling, and they actually weren't. And I debated him. This was in 2008. Kicked his butt. And he hasn't debated anybody since.
I love it.
I had the science, the facts, and the data on my side, showing that the process of drilling and fracking was really fairly safe. And there has been absolutely zero documented cases of fracking directly harming natural gas. It just hasn't. There's nothing that can be alleged that, well, there's a lot of allegations, but nothing that can be documented about that. And now we've got so many wells going down. People are finding out that, people were talking about 3-legged sheep and, goats with 8 legs. And
hasn't happened, has it?
It hasn't. You're right. And they made up all these stories. And we just found out that Craig Stevens up in Lackawanna County, where the drilling was going on, or Susquehanna County, he was a paid activist. It came out in testimony this week. He was one of the biggest, loudest, ugliest protesters up there. You know what he was doing? He was getting paid.
So was he telling the truth? He was reading a script, essentially is what he was doing.
That's right. And he's getting paid to do it.
This is information that people need to know.
Yeah. That was just released. I was in it was in his testimony in the court case against Cabot that he finally admitted that he was getting paid to be an activist up there. And
Greg, there are some people who would tell us, and I when I surf through CNN, I'll catch this stuff. It's settled science. The climate deniers, kind of like we're this fringe group out on some island, the 10 of us. Is that true in the scientific community, that it's the exception that challenges climate change?
No, there's a lot more than 3% of us that disagree with this. The biggest petition of its kind was the Oregon petition that had 35,000 scientists that said that they disagreed with the notion of man-made catastrophic warming. I speak at conferences and meetings all across the United States. Again, I'm speaking to professional engineers next week outside of Dallas. I speak to geologists, and overwhelmingly, these people are just really supportive of what I have to say. And what I have to say is that, yes, temperature's been increasing, and it's been increasing for over 300 years. Yes, CO2 is increasing, and it's mainly due to our burning of fossil fuels. And yes, I agree that that increase in CO2 has to necessarily have some warming effect on the atmosphere. I'll just argue that it's modest and greatly overwhelmed by the same natural forces that have been dominating since the dawn of time.
And is there supporting data? Is there data supporting these assertions, Greg, that you put out, and how do you
yes. Well, my book is Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. So we've got 60 inconvenient facts in there. It's it's very readable. It's written for the non-scientist, but we just launched today, and I think you've got it, is my smartphone app related to this. So now you can get this information in the palm of your hand. You can get information on, and I'm going to call it up here. You can get information on the 60 inconvenient facts. You can go here and you can get, you can figure out that there are more polar bears. This is one on polar bears. Can't see it very well. 60 years of polar bear data showing the polar bears are increasing. That way, if your idiot nephew from Bloomsburg that's majoring in economic justice and sustainable development tells you at Easter dinner that polar bears are going extinct, you can go, well, wait a minute, little Billy. Here's a chart of 60 years of population, polar bear population, showing that they've been increasing. Really? And he goes, oh, what's the source? And you go, oh, well, here, we'll go to the source, and we can find out what the source is of the data, which is important to have, because you just can't throw out charts. You have to make sure that what's the source for it. So we have the charts, the data, and you can go. It's available, just approved this week by Apple after a long process. It's available for Android at the Google Play Store, and for iPhone at the Apple's App Store for iPhones. Just search for Inconvenient Facts, and we actually just launched, and well, it's a soft launch yesterday. We're not going to really blow it up till next week, but yeah, we had 1,000 downloads of the app yesterday in just a few hours.
I'm one of them. And,
good.
It's very user-friendly, Greg. It's very helpful. I always appreciate about you is how you keep things at the 101 level. The everyday person can use this information handily. You know, you don't have wads of information there that you have to, like it's a term paper or something. Very user-friendly.
Right. Here's Antarctic ice, extent of sea ice. It's things like that it's so powerful, and you can have that right in the palm of your hand.
Oh,
so
man, you guys got to get that. I strongly encourage you to do that so we can communicate effectively, like I said at the beginning, with our friends, our family, our neighbors, and help them to see the facts. That's very important to us, putting facts out there. as opposed to talking points or sensationalists who are hucksters who are looking to make a buck. Which brings me to Greg. AOC is telling us the world will end in 12 years. That's nothing new. Isn't that a talking point from Al Gore?
Yeah, well, he's had a lot of predictions, both he and the UN and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. If we go back through their predictions, it's a whole litany of failed predictions. I think the 12 years she's talking about is related to this Green New Deal, because the Green New Deal says we have to get off of fossil fuels by 2030. That's 11 years from now. So I think the 12 years is related to that. I mean, if you look at, in my book, I talk about back in 2005, the UN predicted that by 2010, there would be 50 million climate refugees. And they had a map that showed the most at-risk islands in the Pacific and in the Caribbean. Well, I went back in my book and I looked at the populations in 2005 and 2010. It turns out each one of these high at-risk islands, for people that were going to be fleeing from them, had increased greatly. People weren't fleeing from the islands, they were moving there, right? Come on. And it's just completely opposite. So here's the best part. In 2015, the same UN panel predicted that there'll be the same 50 million climate refugees fleeing from the same islands by 2020. Well, that's next year. I haven't seen too many people fleeing from Barbados and Papua and all the others. So they're, and it's that's the problem with making predictions. It's, you want to make, they made the mistake of having too short of a time span. What you want to do is, if you're going to be a climate alarmist, make sure you make it, the prediction should be 20 or 30 years in the future, so everybody forgets about it and half the people aren't alive. But one of my favorite quotes is from Yogi Berra, because whenever people ask me, what's going to happen to the, what's going to go on in the future with climate and temperature, and I always say, well, my favorite quote from Yogi Berra is, he said, making predictions is really tough, especially about the future. And that's right. Because I mean, if you ask me what's going to happen, I can look at what's happened in the past and say it's probably going to happen again, which if we do that, we look in the past and we see these other warming periods similar to what we're in. If that goes on, we'll probably have another 50, 80, 120 years of warming, with another 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees of warming, and it won't be catastrophic because it hasn't been in the past. But then again, there's other scientists that I really respect that are talking about this grand solar minimum coming up that's going to lead to another significant decline in temperatures for 30 or 40 years. That would be bad. Because if we look throughout Earth's history, we've talked about this before, right, Kim, that if you look at, say, the last 4,500 years of Earth's history and human history, we see there's a tremendous correlation between the rise and fall of temperatures and the rise and fall of civilizations. Humanity's always prospered during warming periods. The past 3 warming periods, going back to what's called the Minoan, the Roman warm period, which is the time of Christ, the medieval warm period, each of these warm periods were hugely prosperous. Crops were bountiful and plentiful. If you were Empress Kim in a warm period, you could feed your subjects, and everybody would love you because they didn't have to worry about where the next meal was coming from.
Jew politician.
But if you were Empress Kim in a cooling period,
I'm not that guy.
Because you would have crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation, and they'd have the pitchforks out for you.
Wow.
And you wouldn't be Empress Kim for very long. And that's what we saw in the past here. Each of these warming periods or the cooling periods were times of great despair and mass depopulation. Each of the warming periods were all much warmer than what we are today. So if we continue to warm, we're not going to, based on what's going on in the past, we're not looking at huge catastrophic climatic events. We're looking at continued prosperity. If we look back, I know a lot. You and your listeners are familiar with Clausen's book, The 5,000 Year Leap, right? And it's he talked about this last 150 years being a time of 5,000 years of prosperity condensed into this 150-year period, and so we look in the rearview mirror, we see nothing but huge success, a blossoming of humanity and civilization. We see an earth that's cleaning and getting better. The climate alarmists look at this into the future, and all they see is death, despair, and dismay.
And you know what, Greg, what I hear in them, and I was in a Barnes and Noble and saw a book titled "What If We Weren't Here?" And I had to leaf through it, and it was about what I thought it was. Humans bad. We should eliminate as many of them as possible. They're earth worshipers. You know, like the earth would be better off without humanity. Whereas we read in Genesis, where we see where God says to Adam and Eve, you know, subdue the earth, you know, tend to care for it. Just the opposite.
Yeah, I'm a contributing writer for the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, and Calvin Beisner, Dr. Calvin Beisner, is the founder and president of that. And he contacted me and he said, Greg, he says, well, first, are you a Christian? I said, well, yeah, I am. And he says, well, that's good, because he says your book is just it embodies what we believe in. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, we believe that we should use all of God's creation for the betterment of mankind, and we should do it as good stewards of his creation.
Well stated. Yeah, we don't want to throw trash out the window and be bad stewards of the earth.
Right.
But on the other hand, Greg, is driving a car evil? Are cars destroying the environment?
No, because what we're seeing is what I see, and my great story is I sometimes feel like I'm an old-time evangelist spreading the good news of increasing CO2 and rising temperatures.
Continue living, people. You're not destroying the world.
Oh, man, I tell you what we see, what you hear from the climate alarmists is their prediction of what may happen 50 or 80 years in the future based on failed climate models, okay, that overpredict warming 2.5 to 2 to 3 times too much. And what I look at is what's actually happening in the real world. You might hear Rush Limbaugh saying, well, I live in the real world. Well, I live in the real world too. And I look at what's actually happening. And what we see is these things of severe weather ain't happening. Increased death due to temperature ain't happening. Increased depths ain't happening. Increased forest fires ain't happening. And what we see is an earth that's thriving and prospering. And I mean, just look at tornadoes, for example. 2016 was the second lowest number of tornadoes ever in the United States. That goes back to 1850. 2013 was the lowest. So 2 recent years of tornadoes were the lowest, first and second. We see hurricanes are actually in a slight decline. For sure, landfalling hurricanes in the United States are in a decline. And we just think things that we're being told are just not so. We see the droughts, and particularly the significant droughts, are declining for the same reason the forest fires are declining. It's an increase in soil moisture due to climate change.
Hey, Greg, first of all, for those who are attending, I strongly suggest you check out today's WashingtonTimes.com. Tammy Bruce is, she's talking about the same things Greg is, and Greg is backing that up with data. Greg, speak to this, will you please? Because she brings in the political factor that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the face of this new generation who swept so many Democrats into the office on this garbage of scaring the heck out of Gen Zers and younger. You know, the boogeyman's here. You better vote for us. How do you can you speak to that? And how do we, who are in this conversation, how do we overcome that? How do we reach that age group?
Yeah, let's first address this need to create fear. I start my book out, and I often reference a quote from H.L. Mencken. H.L. Mencken warned us that governments and institutions needed to create these, what he called imaginary hobgoblins of alarm, with which to frighten the population, because the population needs to be scared enough to readily accept otherwise painful and onerous regulations and laws. Why in the world would we accept economically crippling carbon taxes or the Paris Climate Accord? Why would we do that? Why? Why would America do that? And the answer I'll answer for you, Kim, is the only reason you would do it is if we believe that the earth and humanity and America is teetering on this precipice of a climate apocalypse, climate doom. We must act now. And if we don't reduce our carbon dioxide output, then this whole litany of horrific events will descend upon us. I mean, the latest National Climate Assessment was released in December, which was a litany. To quote Al Gore, it looked like a march through the book of Revelation. They predicted everything. The only thing they forgot was that flaming toads falling out of the sky. They predicted every single bad thing you can imagine. And just the opposite is what we find is actually happening. And so they need that to address that. They need you and me and everybody watching this to be completely terrified of what's going to happen if we don't change our ways. And how do you correct that? It's getting the data. A lot of people have gotten my book and have said, wow. I just had a guy that bought 1,000 copies, Galveston, Texas. He bought 1,000 copies. He just received them this week from me. And
what's he going to do with them?
Well, he's mailing one to every member of Congress and every senator in the United States.
Wow, I love it.
One to everybody and all of his representatives in Texas, and the remainder he's going to give to local schools. He believed in it that much. I have another guy this week just ordered another 50 copies. He'd ordered 150 before. These people believe in what I'm doing, and what I'm doing is enabling with this smartphone app. I'm allowing people to get that data that's in the book and be able to put it, like I say, in the palm of your hand so you can have that information. So you have that right here in your smartphone. And again, if you go to your smartphone and search for inconvenient facts, you can get it too. And it's I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to empower people with
truth,
with the truth, the facts, the inconvenient facts that they don't want you to know. And it's
Can we go to our township building or libraries and request if they would give us a voice to do a web chat there and ask you to zoom in?
Sure.
Okay.
I can do that. And we're both, if you're in Pennsylvania, not too far. I just spoke 3 weeks ago up in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, to the Susquehanna Valley Conservatives. We had an overflow crowd of probably 140 people there. And including the word got out to some of the local professors and the liberals to come and check out this climate denier. And you know what? Because everything is science-based that I talk about, fully sourced and referenced. They went there to pick me apart and couldn't find a thing.
I love it. Were there, were there young people there listening in on this and taking it in? And
yes, there were. We had a group, I think about 8 college students that were there. They were very appreciative. We had a gentleman in the audience that said, every college student that's in attendance, I'm going to pay for your book. I'm going to buy you a book.
Awesome.
So I allowed him to do that.
Your book.
I'm a capitalist as well.
Being as productive as I think, be more productive tomorrow than you were today. What's wrong with that? But Greg, your book has the ability to impact not only how people think, but in not just in this way, but for our purposes here, it impacts how people will vote.
It does. We need to enlighten people, and I like to think that I'm doing something. And again, the smartphone app, I think it's going to be very,
Game changer,
very
Greg. A game changer.
a game changer. That's what I'm thinking. I'm too close to it. I'm biased completely. But the people that I've been working with on this, everybody that looks at it, I just showed it to my former congressman, Keith Rothfuss, who got defeated by Connor Lamb. We sat to talk about at lunch about something completely different. And he got my phone and just couldn't put it down. He's like, "Oh my goodness." He said, "When can I get it?" And I said, "Oh." And I get that reaction from people, and I think it's going to go viral here once we do it. So if you go and get it, tell your friends about it.
Hey, can you send us a link for that, Greg? Can you send me
Sure.
that, and I'll shoot it out to everybody, and
Yeah,
then
sure.
they can pass it on. This could be very revolutionary. Anybody out in the audience listening in, if you want to type in any comments, questions as to how we get this message out. My burden is for the younger generation, who I think are exploited in so many ways by one particular party in particular, and that's just based on what they say. And I think that they're being frightened unnecessarily. And Greg, you put forth facts, and I'm grateful for that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. And I hope, because my screen is kind of flummoxed up here, but I hopefully everything was okay here with this.
We could talk about a million different things, and in the future when you return, we'll break down different topics and how we can use this information to get truth out to our voters, to our younger generation, to our colleges, so that they don't have to live in fear of something that, based on the evidence, more than likely is not going to happen. And what ultimately, thank you, Judy, hi, that they don't get is that God created this world, and he controls weather. And people tease about weather people. It's a high-paying gig that you can be wrong half the time. But the fact is that I'm sure when they make the predictions it's right, but weather changes. And ultimately, we believe that God is behind that change. It's his world.
Yeah, there's exactly. And we see that when we talk about God, nature, whatever that is, the dawn of time. And what I believe is that forces is sun dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And that your listeners aren't idiots. They're not. I know they're not. And they know that that's not how nature works. Those same natural forces are in action today, just as they have been since the dawn of time. They didn't stop. So yes, perhaps increasing CO2 and greenhouse emissions are adding to warming. I think they are, but I think they're modest and greatly overwhelmed by those same natural forces that have been driving temperature. If you look at the warming trend we're in, we know what year it started. It was the year 1695. It was in the depths of the Little Ice Age, the horrific Little Ice Age, where half the population of Iceland perished. It's thought that a third of the population of the entire Earth perished during the Little Ice Age. That was a period not that long ago. That was, again, the worst of it was in the late 1600s. And we've been warming, thankfully, with this God-giving warmth that we've had since then. And
So it's a good thing, as you stated earlier. Civilization prospers actually when that happens, and you with your excellent illustration, Greg. We're going to start winding down. If anybody wants to, comment, this would be your time. 3 things, folks. Get the app. The app is good.
good,
It's
great.
No, Greg, I'm not. This isn't a shameless plug. It's when people like me could use. I'm not a digital person, okay? Not a techie. I found it very user friendly. Your book, because I'm going to put it out there to anybody listening. If anybody wants to start a book club on COTC and wants to invite people this is a safe space to bring people who might be, I'm not sure about it, or, this is a bunch of crap. What a safe place to come to is a web chat where you don't have to be identified, but you can listen in, you can type in your questions, and we can have these conversations. Maybe Greg will join us from time to time, and we can get more into detail. So if you would consider that. And to me, activism, Greg, is just starts with talking, sharing truths with people. We talk about all kinds of subjects here, and we'll continue to do that. But we want to reach out behind. We just don't want to preach to the choir anymore, Greg. We want to reach out to people who buy the CNN and MSNBC garbage and say, look, you need to read this stuff. You need to read the facts, the research. Your thoughts?
Yeah, because I've reached a lot of people in the last year. Tens of millions of people have heard me talk about this. I've been on Tucker Carlson, Fox and Friends, Laura Ingraham. Nobody as big in radio as Kim Kennedy, but Wayne Allen Root and Joe Pags and some of the big names. Again, not as big as Kim Kennedy, but
flattering me, Greg.
Yeah, how am I doing? And but I've gotten this message out, but in some ways we're preaching to the crowd, and we need each one of these. And that's why I'm so helpful that this smartphone app that I got, that it'll put this information, because it's very difficult for people. I live and breathe this stuff. I'm a climate change geek, and I'm doing it every day, all day.
Do it.
But other people, they don't have that deep knowledge. So what I want to do is put this in the palm of their hands with clearly science-based, researched information. And also it's important to have, what's the source of the data? Because anybody can create a chart and create graphics, but where did it come from? Because we see so much on the internet, from Facebook and whatever, and you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know if it's actually science-based or not. So I'm very, very hopeful that this Inconvenient Facts app is going to be huge. And then again, I have a lot of information on my website, inconvenientfacts.xyz.
And you can get the book there too. There's a discount there for buying it from there, isn't there, Greg?
1776 is the discount code. So
can't forget that.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg. Tammy Bruce from writing in an op-ed today, folks, from WashingtonTimes.com, ends with this, and we're going to end with this with your comments. Sounds like a cultural revolution to me. What's the fair and just transition for all communities she's talking about? Vague enough to be modeled on Pol Pot or Chairman Mao Zedong? Or maybe like Martha Stewart, who knows? And that's the point. The resolution will also call for clean air and water, climate resiliency, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment for all for generations to come, according to the letter. Lastly, the Green New Deal will promote justice, equity, by preventing current and repairing historic oppression to frontline and vulnerable communities. Further proof of the lack of seriousness in this outrageous pitching of protesting vulnerable communities. And on it goes. Based on what I just read to you, can you cut through all that mumbo jumbo? What are they really?
What could go wrong? I mean, come on, there's
change, Greg. Hope and change. Remember that?
Oh my goodness! Yeah, there's a lot to go wrong with that. No, it's pie in the sky socialism is what it is, and it's this. They're using these imaginary hobgoblins of alarm that we talked about, that H.L. Mencken warned us about. It's the Green New Deal. I think it's a reach too far for them, just like they reached too far in New York and in Virginia with their with the abortion, that it's exposing just how wrong they are on abortion. And that the Green New Deal is just so obviously flawed. No common sense individual that has even a small iota of common sense and rationality can look at this and say, oh my God, this isn't going to work. It can't work. I mean, you look at the trillions of dollars that would be required to enact all this.
Greg, they are reaching the ears of the younger generation. And I know that the people who are here tonight want to be able to articulate correctly and clearly truth to that generation. And we're going to continue to explore ideas of how to do that, to counteract that, because I know I have a friend who has told me that there are paid activists on college campuses preaching the leftist doctrine, and this is part of it. We know that's Soros money, more than likely, that's doing that. And we want to find ways to practically counteract that, because we don't have Soros dollars at our disposal. But this app is a great start. We just need to, we're all busy people, working people. I know everybody who's here tonight isn't living off the system, they're working people. But just in the people we rub shoulders with every day, hey, there's this great new app out. You know, oh, did you hear about the New Deal? Yeah, you know, I've got some information here that can counteract that. Another side of the coin from people who have researched, from people who, getting back to what I said earlier, Greg, people who've earned the right to be heard. You have a PhD in geology. Your associates, the people that you're working with, have spent their lives researching this, working in this. So you're not just, you know, some talking head on television. And here in this situation, you've done your homework, and it is critically important, folks. I know I'm beating this, but these are voters. These people are pulling the lever for an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And my burden, Greg, is that people think that she's just an exception. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, she's leading the charge, and there are more and more people buying in. It might be that they're using this Green New Deal as the art of the deal of Donald Trump, where you reach for the sky and negotiate something less.
Yes.
Is what I think is going to happen. And we have so many people now that are bought into this carbon tax idea. And if we go, oh, well, we can't do the Green New Deal. Well, but we'll do a carbon tax. Even Republicans have gotten it. You know, some of these old Bush era globalists, the one world order guys, George Shultz, Trent Lott, others have bought into this idea of a carbon tax. And even the Competitive Enterprise Institute, what I could not believe is that they've bought into it. And it's, more and more people are buying into this carbon tax. And again, they bought into these hobgoblins of alarm. It's sad, really. We need to fight against this. And that's really the troubling part for me, are the Republicans that have bought into it. But thank God we have Donald Trump at the helm. Just think if we had Mrs. Clinton at this time, we'd still be in the Paris Climate Accord.
We'd all be living on reservations and trailers if she was president. And especially Republicans would be at the front of the line. We would have froze to death last week. But seriously, folks, I'd like to have Greg back on to talk about carbon tax, and how I want to talk more, Greg, if you would give this thought, teaching us how to communicate, initiating conversations, or when they come up, how to respond. I hope, guys, I'm not insulting you by that, but I, for one, would like to become more adept at using this information, and, as what I like to say, injecting truth into the culture. And science is just one of them. Culture change. We talked about a variety of topics here. But if you guys would like that, shoot me an email or a text and let me know if you'd like to have that conversation. Greg, hopefully that will work with your schedule.
Sure.
We would love to get you on college campuses and high schools. My burden is into the public universities and high schools. And if anybody listening has any ideas or suggestions for me, would you shoot me an email and let me know? We want to get this message, and we don't want to just preach to the choir, as I said. We want to take this message out and influence people, voters especially. Greg, any closing thoughts?
No, I just I would encourage people to go get the app or buy the book. You need something
To be informed.
To be informed. And I'm biased, of course, and a capitalist, but it's I think the app is really groundbreaking. It's revolutionary, and I think that it's well worth the time and effort for your listeners and viewers to go get it.
And friends, I second that. The reason I asked Greg in particular is because I think he has the gift of taking just a vast array of information, which could be really overwhelming. And like I said, breaking it down to the everyday person's level. And I do appreciate that, Greg. So we're going to close out at this point, thanking you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Excellent conversation, as always. And panelists who took time out of your schedule, thank you for being with us. I'd love to hear from you how we can take this information and get it out, disperse it among the populace. Let's keep talking, and we'll get Greg back in here in the next couple of months. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Good night.
All right, take it easy.